Before 2026 begins, let God's love restore what is broken inside you. Before the new year arrives, your heart already knows the truth that your mind keeps trying to ignore. Something inside you is tired of pretending it is fine. Something inside you has been carrying unspoken weight for far too long. You survived the days when strength felt forced. You endured moments you never told anyone about. And as this year reaches its end, the cracks you learned to hide are asking to be seen. Not exposed, not judged. Seen. This message is for the part of you that quietly broke while you kept moving. The part that still aches even after the world thinks you healed. The part that wonders if anything inside you can truly be restored. You do not need to start 2026 pretending that nothing happened. You do not need to step into a new year carrying the remains of the battles that shaped your silence. God's love is not waiting for January. It is reaching for you now, before the clock resets, before you step forward, before you lose another piece of yourself trying to be strong. There is a restoration already beginning within you. Gentle, steady, unexpected. You may not see it yet, but you can feel the shift. The desire to breathe again, the longing to release what has weighed down your spirit, the quiet hope that maybe this time things can be different. Stay here, because the healing you have been postponing is already moving toward you. And before 2026 begins, God's love is preparing to restore what has been breaking inside you for far too long. There are moments in life when the weight you carry becomes so familiar that you stop noticing how heavy it truly is. You wake up, move through your days, speak with the same voice, act with the same composure. Yet deeply inside, you know something has been shifting. Not loudly, not suddenly, quietly. A slow unraveling in the places you never allowed yourself to acknowledge. The kind of unraveling that does not break you in front of others, but weakens you in the solitude of your own thoughts. You begin to realize that part of you has been living in fragments, gathering strength from reserves that were never meant to sustain you for this long. Brokenness rarely announces itself. It settles inside you as tiredness at first, then as hesitation, then as silence. Eventually, you start adjusting to it, moving around the fractured spaces within your heart as if they were normal, as if they were the price of surviving another year. But there comes a moment, usually near the end of a cycle, when the truth becomes harder to ignore. You sense the places where you bent beyond your limit. You remember situations where you gave more than you had. You feel the exhaustion of being everything for everyone except yourself. And for the first time, you see the cost of holding together a life that felt heavy even in your strongest moments. The end of a year has a way of peeling back the emotional layers you spent months protecting. Not to expose you, but to return you to a clarity you abandoned while trying to endure. The memories you avoided begin resurfacing with new meaning. The disappointments you buried start to reveal the wounds they left behind. The dreams you postponed remind you of the parts of yourself still waiting to breathe again. What feels like discomfort is often the beginning of restoration. God brings into the light what needs healing, not to overwhelm your spirit, but to remind you that you were never meant to carry it into another year unchanged. You may look at your life and see the parts that cracked under pressure, the relationships that thinned, the confidence that faded, the enthusiasm that dissolved slowly under the weight of responsibilities. These are not signs of failure. They are evidence of how deeply you tried to stay strong in seasons that required more from you than your heart could give. Strength held you together, but strength alone cannot heal what broke inside you. Healing requires honesty. Healing requires space. Healing requires a love that meets you where your endurance ends. As you stand at the edge of a new year, something within you senses the need for renewal. Not a resolution or a promise, but a restoration of the inner places that shaped every moment you lived in 2025. The heaviness you feel is not a punishment. It is a signal. A quiet message that your soul no longer wishes to carry the same burdens into the next season of your life. What broke you does not need to define you. What wounded you does not need to follow you. What exhausted you does not need to continue draining your spirit. This chapter marks the moment when you stop looking at your brokenness as an obstacle and begin to see it as the doorway through which God's love can enter. Restoration does not begin when everything is fixed. It begins when you finally admit that something inside you deserves to be whole again. And as this awareness rises within you, something shifts, deeply, quietly, irrevocably. The year is ending, but the healing you have needed is just beginning. There comes a point when the body keeps moving, the mind keeps functioning, and life continues unfolding, yet your spirit remains anchored in a place of quiet exhaustion. You show up where you need to be. You speak when required. You fulfill responsibilities with the same determination that carried you through the hardest moments of the year. Yet beneath every action, there is a silence that no one sees. A silence shaped by the parts of you that grew weary, not because you lacked faith, but because you spent the year pouring yourself out faster than you could be refilled. You survived days when hope felt thin. You survived nights when sleep came late because your thoughts refused to loosen their hold. You survived moments where you questioned your own strength, wondering how much longer you could carry the weight without collapsing beneath it. Survival became your rhythm, not by choice but by necessity. And as you look back on this year, you start to recognize the difference between living and enduring. Endurance kept you standing, but it slowly stole pieces of your joy, your clarity, and your trust in your own heart. When a person spends too long in survival mode, something subtle happens. They forget what it feels like to breathe without pressure. They forget how to receive without feeling guilty. They forget that rest is not weakness. You may have reached the end of 2025 believing that what you carried was normal, but deep inside, you know that something in you has been longing for release. Longing for a moment where you no longer need to pretend that everything inside you stayed untouched by the battles you fought. Life does not wait for brokenness to heal before demanding more strength from you. It keeps moving, asking for decisions, responsibilities, reactions. Even when your heart is quietly fractured, you learned to adjust, to smile through tension, to hold conversations while your mind drifted elsewhere, to make room for everyone's expectations while ignoring your own emotional depletion. You stayed present, even when parts of you felt absent. This is the kind of exhaustion that cannot be measured by sleep or time. It is the exhaustion of the soul. But here is the truth that rises near the end of every year. The heart cannot heal from what it refuses to acknowledge. And as the days move toward 2026, you begin to feel a pull toward honesty. Not the kind you share with others, but the kind that whispers within you during quiet moments. A whisper that says you are not as strong as you pretend. A whisper that says you have been carrying burdens that were never meant to be held alone. A whisper that says something inside you broke this year, and you have not yet given yourself permission to grieve it. This honesty is not weakness. It is the doorway to restoration. To admit that you are tired is to admit that you deserve renewal. To acknowledge that something inside you cracked is to acknowledge that it can be repaired. God does not restore what you hide. He restores what you bring to light, even if the only person who knows the truth in that moment is you. And as you begin to face what truly happened within you in 2025, something shifts. The facade falls away. The weight loosens. The soul breathes again. You may not know how to heal yet. You may not know what the next step looks like, but you can feel the invitation rising inside you. The invitation to stop surviving long enough to let yourself live again. The invitation to stop enduring long enough to let yourself be restored. The invitation to walk into 2026 not holding the same fragments, but allowing God's love to gather them gently and renew what you thought was lost. This chapter marks the moment when survival is no longer your identity, when exhaustion is no longer your norm, when the truth you resisted becomes the truth that sets you free. Because before 2026 begins, something in you is finally ready to be rebuilt. Brokenness rarely happens in a single moment. It forms in layers, each one settling quietly over the year until the heart begins to feel heavier than it once was. You may look back at 2025 and struggle to identify the exact moment when something inside you shifted, because the shift was not sudden. It was subtle. It happened in the moments you dismissed as small, the disappointments you swallowed without processing, the conversations that left you unsettled, the hopes you lowered before they could be challenged, the emotions you silenced because you felt no one would understand. Each of these moments left a mark, not large enough to break you on their own, but persistent enough to weaken your spirit over time. It is only at the end of a year that the layers become clear. You sense the distance between who you were at the beginning and who you have become by the end. You notice the confidence that thinned, the joy that quieted, the peace that slipped through unnoticed gaps. And while the world sees you functioning, you feel the truth within. Something broke in places too deep for others to reach. Pain has a way of rearranging the heart. It shifts your expectations. It changes what you believe you deserve. It alters the way you view yourself. It can turn certainty into hesitation and enthusiasm into caution. You begin to live braced for disappointment. Not because you want to, but because you have learned that even small hopes can become painful when they collapse. Each layer of brokenness is a response to something that once mattered, a dream that bent too far, a trust that cracked, a moment when life surprised you in ways you were not emotionally prepared for. What makes layered brokenness so difficult is that it is easy to hide. You can speak normally, work normally, and love normally, while carrying fractures no one else can see. These fractures become internal instructions that shape your decisions. You choose safety over possibility. You choose silence over vulnerability. You choose endurance over expression. These choices feel protective, yet they slowly create a version of you disconnected from your own heart. But here is the truth that begins to rise as the year ends. God sees every layer, not just the ones you acknowledge, not just the ones you show, every hidden fracture, every silent disappointment, every hope you stopped believing in. He sees the way pain shaped your reactions. He sees the way exhaustion crept into your spirit. He sees the way you began to shrink emotionally just to survive the year. You may not have told anyone what broke inside you, but your silence has never been invisible to him. And yet, layered brokenness is not the end of your story. It is the place where restoration begins. Restoration does not move through the outermost layer first. It begins at the deepest one, the place where the first crack formed. The moment that influenced every moment afterward. God restores the heart the way an artist restores a painting. Carefully, patiently, from the inside out, layer by layer, not erasing what happened, but transforming the meaning of it. As you reflect on 2025, you may feel the weight of all the layers that accumulated within you, but you may also feel something else, a readiness you did not have before, a quiet willingness for these layers to be touched, healed, and lifted. The heart grows tired of hiding. It grows tired of pretending the deeper fractures do not matter. It begins to seek what it once resisted, restoration. This chapter marks the moment when you stop asking what broke you and begin asking what is ready to be rebuilt. Because the layers that once felt permanent are now becoming the very places where God's love will work most deeply. Before 2026 begins, those layers are already loosening, and soon, they will no longer define you. There comes a moment in every difficult year when the heart quietly lowers its expectations, not because it stopped believing in goodness, but because it learned to prepare for disappointment. You may not remember the specific day this shift happened within you, but you can feel its effects. At some point in 2025, a part of you stopped expecting good things with the same confidence you once had. You adjusted your hopes, not to dream less, but to avoid the sharp edge of being let down again. This adjustment felt responsible at the time, a way to protect yourself, a way to stay steady. Yet now, at the end of the year, you can sense how much it cost you. When the heart stops expecting good things, life becomes quieter in ways that do not feel peaceful. You move with caution instead of openness. You measure your steps instead of advancing with trust. You brace for what might go wrong instead of anticipating what could go right. And although you may have convinced yourself that this was wisdom, deep inside you know it was weariness. A weariness shaped not by a lack of faith, but by the accumulation of moments where hope did not unfold the way you imagined. Hope felt dangerous, expectation felt fragile, and so you taught yourself to settle. But settling does not protect the heart, it slowly restricts it. You begin to shrink the space where joy could enter. You begin to accept less than what your spirit was created to hold. You begin to silence the dreams that once brought fire to your voice. Nothing dramatic changes on the outside, yet internally, something begins to dim. This dimming is not failure. It is the heart signaling that it has been carrying disappointment without relief, and that the weight has quietly shaped its ability to receive goodness. What you may not realize is that this lowering of expectations is one of the deepest forms of brokenness, not the kind people can see, not the kind you can articulate easily. It is the fractured place between desire and fear, between longing and resignation, between who you hoped to become and who you settled into because life became too heavy. This fracture is subtle, but it affects everything. It shapes the way you interpret opportunities. It colors the way you view yourself. It filters the way you perceive God's movement in your life. Yet even in this dimness, something in you has refused to die. There is a small, persistent part of your heart that never fully accepted the idea that disappointment was your final story. This part has stayed alive beneath the exhaustion, beneath the silence, beneath the caution. It rises now, near the end of the year, because the soul instinctively knows when a season is shifting. It knows when the time of settling has reached its limit. It knows when renewal is near, even if the mind cannot see evidence of it yet. God does not let the heart remain in the place where it stopped expecting good things. He meets you in that exact space, not to shame you for lowering your hopes, but to lift your eyes again. He understands why you became cautious. He sees every moment that shaped your hesitation. He knows how much you wanted to believe, even when believing felt painful. Restoration begins when God gently reaches into the place where you stopped expecting and whispers that it is safe to hope again. This chapter marks the shift from resignation to possibility. It is where the heart begins to consider that goodness has not passed it by. It is where the soul starts to imagine that the next year may hold something the past year could not offer. Not because circumstances are changing yet, but because you are. Your spirit, although tired, is beginning to rise. Your longing, although quiet, is beginning to speak. Your vision, although blurred, is beginning to clear. Before 2026 begins, God is touching the exact part of you that stopped expecting good things. That touch is not loud. It is not forceful. It is a quiet restoration happening beneath the layers of your brokenness. And as it moves through you, the heart that learned to protect itself slowly remembers how to hope again. Restoration often begins in the places you avoid the most. Not the areas you show to others with confidence, but the quiet corners you learned to hide even from yourself. Throughout this year, there were emotions you pushed down because you believed they would disrupt your stability. There were thoughts you silenced because you feared they would open wounds you were not ready to face. There were memories you refused to revisit because you sensed they held more weight than you could carry. What you avoided did not disappear. It settled inside you, shaping the way you moved, spoke, trusted, and hoped. Every person has a private room within the heart, a place where unresolved pain sits in stillness. You walk past that room often. You keep the door closed. You convince yourself that if you do not touch what hurts, it will lose its power. But pain does not lose strength through avoidance. It loses strength through understanding, acknowledgement, and the gentle presence that meets it without pressure. When you avoid a wound, it becomes the architect of your thoughts. It influences your reactions. It quietly rewrites how you perceive your own worth. This invisible influence is often what God begins to address first. Divine restoration never starts with the surface. It begins with the hidden places where your heart learned to shrink, the fear you never named, the disappointment you minimized, the grief you tried to outrun. These are the places God touches with the most tenderness. Not to reopen what you endured, but to free you from the internal weight you carried after it happened. Avoidance may have helped you survive the moment, but healing requires a different posture. Healing requires the courage to let the truth rise, not to break you, but to release you. There is a part of you that knows exactly what you have been avoiding. You feel it when the room grows quiet. You sense it when a memory flickers unexpectedly. You recognize it in the heaviness that comes without explanation. These moments are not interruptions. They are invitations. Invitations to stop running from what shaped you. Invitations to stop pretending that the unresolved does not matter. Invitations to allow God to meet you where your avoidance once stood. The truth is simple and often difficult to accept. What you avoid holds the greatest potential to heal you. The wound you protect is the wound God wants to restore. The emotion you silence is the emotion that holds the key to your freedom. The story you refuse to revisit is the story where your strength was tested most deeply, and where your restoration is waiting to unfold. God does not enter your heart to expose you. He enters to release you from carrying pain alone. As the year draws to a close, these hidden rooms begin to feel heavier. Not because the pain has grown, but because your spirit is finally ready to let it go. You have reached a maturity within your own healing that makes avoidance unnecessary. The heart no longer wishes to carry what it was never meant to keep. You may feel moments of restlessness, unexpected sadness, or quiet reflection. These are signs that the internal walls are softening, making space for something new. Space for truth. Space for clarity. Space for restoration. Facing what you avoided does not mean reliving the pain. It means acknowledging that you deserve freedom from it. It means recognizing that you no longer need to protect yourself from experiences that already passed. It means discovering that God meets you with compassion in the exact places where you once hid from Him. When you open the doors you once kept locked, you allow yourself to receive the healing you have needed all year. This chapter marks the beginning of that opening. A gentle, steady willingness to let God's love enter the places you avoided, not to overwhelm you, but to restore what has stayed wounded in silence. What you avoided is not a barrier anymore. It is becoming the doorway through which your deepest restoration will begin. There are seasons when you carry burdens that were never meant to be yours, responsibilities you accepted because you didn't want to disappoint anyone. Emotions you absorbed because someone else did not know how to manage their own. Expectations you tried to fulfill because you believed that holding everything together made you strong. Over time, these invisible weights begin to reshape you, not because you failed, but because the load was heavier than your heart was created to hold. And as the year closes, the truth becomes harder to deny. Much of what exhausted you in 2025 came from burdens that were never assigned to you. You may not realize how deeply this affected you. You became the one who listened when your own heart was breaking, the one who stayed steady when no one asked how steady you truly felt, the one who absorbed tension to keep peace around you, the one who tried to solve problems that did not belong to your soul, the one who carried silence for the sake of protecting others. These roles seemed noble, but they left your spirit stretched thin. You were holding emotional weight that no human being can carry indefinitely. There is a particular fatigue that settles into the bones when you live beyond your emotional capacity. A fatigue that does not go away with rest, because it is not physical. It is the weariness of someone who has been responsible for holding together pieces of the world that were never theirs to hold. You may have believed you were being strong, but strength twisted by obligation becomes a silent burden. And silent burdens accumulate until the heart begins to forget what lightness feels like. What makes misplaced burdens so dangerous is that they blur your sense of identity. You begin to confuse your worth with your usefulness. You begin to measure your value by how much you can endure. You tell yourself that you are needed, essential, irreplaceable, and in the process, you neglect the truth that your soul requires nurturing too. Carrying what is not yours slowly steals your clarity. It narrows your vision. It keeps you walking in circles of exhaustion rather than moving toward restoration. But God does not ask you to carry what breaks you. He does not ask you to solve every problem, to fix every heart, to absorb every tension. Much of what weighed on you this year did not come from Him. It came from moments when you believed you had to be more than human, moments when you forgot that your soul was designed to receive as much as it gives. Divine love does not load the heart with burdens. Divine love lifts them. As the year reaches its close, you may feel a strange mixture of heaviness and clarity. Heaviness from the burdens you carried. Clarity from the realization that many of them were never yours. This awareness is not meant to bring guilt. It is meant to bring freedom. When you recognize that a burden does not belong to you, you give yourself permission to release it. You allow yourself to return to your true capacity, not the inflated one created by survival. Letting go of these weights is not abandonment. It is obedience to the truth that your soul matters too. It is acknowledging that you cannot save anyone by being crushed under the responsibility of their healing. It is understanding that you are not required to carry emotional loads that drain your spirit. It is accepting that restoration begins when you step out from under what you were never meant to hold. This chapter marks a transition in your journey, the shift from carrying out of obligation to living out of alignment, the shift from emotional survival to spiritual clarity, the shift from weight that breaks you to love that restores you. And as you begin releasing the burdens that never belonged to you, something unexpected happens. Space opens. Breathing becomes easier. The heart grows lighter, and for the first time in a long time you sense that restoration is not only possible, it has already begun. There are patterns that shape your life long before you recognize them. Not dramatic patterns you can easily name, but quiet cycles that repeat themselves in the background of your days. You move through them without noticing, responding with familiar reactions, choosing familiar fears, returning to familiar doubts. These cycles feel natural because they have been part of your rhythm for years. Yet somewhere in 2025, one of these cycles tightened around you with enough force to reveal its presence. Something within you whispered that you were living the same emotional story again, even though the circumstances looked different. Every person carries internal loops formed by old wounds. You may find yourself pulling away when life starts to feel good, because a part of you learned long ago that good things can disappear suddenly. You may cling to control when uncertainty rises, because unpredictability once left you hurt. You may silence your needs because you were taught to put others first, even when you were breaking inside. These patterns feel protective, but they quietly keep restoration at a distance. They hold you inside versions of yourself that no longer reflect who you are becoming. What makes these cycles difficult to notice is that they disguise themselves as your personality. You tell yourself that pulling back is just who you are, that hesitation is wisdom, that silence is strength, that avoiding conflict is maturity. Yet beneath these behaviors, there is a deeper truth. You are not cautious because your heart is small. You are cautious because your heart remembers pain. You are not hesitant because you doubt your worth. You are hesitant because you fear repeating disappointment. You are not distant because you lack emotion. You are distant because connection once came with a cost you were not prepared to pay again. God sees the cycles you cannot name. He sees the quiet battles you fight in your thoughts before you speak a single word. He sees the way certain moments trigger old emotions. He sees how a small disappointment can reopen long-buried wounds. And he sees how much these cycles have shaped the path of your year. Cycles create repetition. Repetition creates exhaustion. And exhaustion creates the illusion that nothing can change. But even as these patterns tightened their hold, something within you resisted. A part of you refused to let this be the story you carry into 2026. The presence of a cycle does not mean you are failing. It means you are human. It means your heart is trying to protect itself the only way it knows how. But what once protected you is now limiting you. God does not expose your cycles to shame you. He exposes them to free you. He reveals the pattern so he can rewrite it. He helps you see the loop so he can interrupt it. And often, The pattern becomes visible only when you reach the emotional edge of your year, when you finally pause long enough to recognize what has been shaping your reactions. There is something sacred about recognizing a cycle for the first time. It is a moment of awakening. A moment of clarity. A moment when you realize that the year did not break you. It revealed you. It showed you the places where your heart still seeks safety. It showed you the old wounds still influencing your choices. It showed you the emotional habits that kept you smaller than your spirit was created to be. This revelation is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of freedom. Once you see a cycle, you cannot unsee it. The heart begins to shift. The mind begins to question old beliefs. The spirit begins to rise against the pattern. What once felt normal now feels heavy. What once felt comfortable now feels restrictive. God uses this discomfort to move you out of the emotional loops that drained your strength for too long. He prepares you to step into 2026 with a different posture, a different vision, a different capacity for hope. This chapter marks the turning point where cycles lose their power. Not because they vanish instantly, but because you finally recognize them. Awareness breaks repetition. Awareness opens the door to restoration. And as you step into this awareness, your soul begins to reclaim the freedom that cycles once stole from you. The story that held you for years is loosening its grip. And what comes next will not look like what you have lived before. Restoration rarely announces itself with dramatic change. It begins quietly, in the small shifts within your inner world. You may not see anything different on the outside, yet something subtle is unfolding beneath the surface. A softening in the places that once felt rigid. A loosening in the fears that once kept you still. A warmth returning to the spaces that had grown cold. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the first signs of dawn after a long night. You do not notice the exact moment the darkness begins to fade, but you recognize that light is rising. This inner reconstruction often begins in stillness, not the kind that comes from inactivity, but the stillness that forms when your soul no longer wants to fight the battles it fought all year. You start to feel an internal quieting, a desire to breathe without rushing, to reflect without judgment, to exist without performing strength. This stillness is not emptiness. It is the beginning of alignment. A space where your heart can hear what exhaustion once drowned out. A space where truth becomes clearer, even if the path is not yet fully visible. As restoration unfolds, your spirit becomes more sensitive to what no longer belongs. You notice the heaviness that comes from certain thoughts. You recognize the tightness in your chest when old fears try to rise. You feel the emotional shift when a memory touches a wound that is no longer in control of your decisions. These small signals are evidence that your inner architecture is being rebuilt. You are learning to discern what harms you, what drains you, and what no longer deserves a place inside you. Healing often looks like contradiction. You may have moments of unexpected peace, followed by moments of unexplained sadness. You may feel clarity one day and confusion the next. You may sense progress even while old emotions resurface. This does not mean you are failing. It means your heart is reorganizing itself. The pieces that were scattered throughout the year are being gathered, examined, and placed back with intention. Reconstruction is not linear. It moves through layers, just as the breaking once did. There is a moment in every restoration process when you realize that you are reacting differently. The situations that once triggered anxiety now meet a calmer version of you. Words that once pierced deeply no longer reach the same place. Fears that once shaped your decisions begin to lose their authority. This shift does not happen because everything around you changed. It happens because you changed. Your inner world has begun to realign itself with truth rather than pain. You are being rebuilt from the inside out. God often works in this quiet reconstruction long before external evidence appears. He strengthens your spirit before circumstances shift. He heals your perception before relationships change. He restores your identity before opportunities open. You may not see the full picture yet, but you can feel the difference. Something within you is not breaking anymore. It is rebuilding. Slowly, steadily, silently. The heart that felt fragile months ago is becoming grounded. The mind that felt overwhelmed is becoming clearer. The soul that felt drained is beginning to rise. Restoration does not erase what happened to you this year. It redefines it. The wounds lose their authority. The memories lose their weight. The fears lose their power. What once shaped your brokenness now becomes the foundation of your strength. You are not returning to who you were before the year began. You are becoming someone deeper, steadier, more aware, and more aligned with truth than ever before. This chapter marks the phase in your journey where internal reconstruction is no longer subtle. You can feel the shift. You can sense the rebuilding. You can recognize the signs of life returning to places you once believed were permanently damaged. Before 2026 begins, the restoration within you is already underway. And soon, what God has been rebuilding in silence will begin to reveal itself in the way you live, the way you think, and the way you carry your own heart. There comes a moment in every journey of healing when the heart, exhausted from resisting, finally allows itself to exhale. Not a shallow breath made of habit, but a deep release that rises from the very place where your strength felt strained. This exhale is not physical, it is spiritual. It is the moment when the weight you have carried begins to loosen, not because your circumstances have changed, but because something inside you refuses to hold everything the same way anymore. This quiet letting go does not come from giving up. It comes from awakening. Throughout 2025, you held yourself together through storms that no one fully understood. You pushed forward on days when everything in you was asking to stop. You kept functioning while a part of your heart sat in silence, waiting for permission to rest. But now, as the year approaches its end, your spirit recognizes that it cannot step into a new season carrying the same level of tension. Your soul has reached the threshold where survival ends and restoration begins. And the first sign of this shift is the exhale you did not know you were holding. This exhale is the release of the fear that kept your shoulders tight. It is the softening of the walls you built around emotions you did not know how to process. It is the surrender of the belief that you must navigate everything alone. It is the quiet acceptance that you deserve peace, even if you are still learning how to welcome it. When the heart finally exhales, it makes space for what it once pushed away. It makes room for clarity. It makes room for truth. It makes room for love. There is a tenderness in this moment, a softness that feels unfamiliar but safe. The tension you carried for months begins to lose its grip. The thoughts that once spiraled now slow to a gentle hum. The exhaustion that weighed you down rises, not as heaviness, but as a signal that you are ready to be restored. Healing often begins in these subtle shifts. They are not loud. They are not dramatic, but they are real. They are the quiet signs that your inner world is opening again. This exhale also reveals the difference between control and trust. For much of the year, you held tightly to what you feared might fall apart. You tried to manage outcomes. You tried to predict emotional storms. You tried to protect your heart from repeating old pain. But control is a heavy armor, and you were never meant to wear it for this long. When you exhale, you loosen your grip. You allow your heart to rest without expecting disaster. You begin to trust that you are not alone in this journey, and that the next step does not depend solely on your strength. Even in this softening, the mind may try to remind you of what went wrong. It may bring back memories of disappointment. It may replay conversations. It may prompt old fears. This does not mean you are moving backward. It means your heart is healing through truth. When the heart finally breathes, the emotions that were trapped inside begin to rise. Not to overwhelm you, but to release you. The exhale opens the door for what has been held in silence to come forward with gentleness. You may find that this inner release brings a sense of clarity you did not expect. You begin to see the year for what it was, not through the lens of pain, but through the lens of growth. You recognize the strength you built while feeling weak. You recognize the resilience that formed while you endured. You recognize the wisdom that grew from every moment you thought broke you. This clarity is not forced. It is the natural result of allowing your spirit to breathe again. This chapter marks the moment when you transition from carrying pain to releasing it, from holding tension to letting it dissolve, from standing guarded to opening your heart to restoration. The exhale is not the end of your healing. It is the beginning of your transformation. And as you breathe again, you step into a version of yourself that is ready for what 2026 can bring. Not the version shaped by fear, but the version shaped by truth, resilience, and a love that is already restoring you. There is a part of restoration that unfolds in silence long before anything visibly changes. It is the stage where nothing around you looks different, yet everything within you is slowly being rearranged. You may feel calmer without understanding why. You may feel more grounded even though your circumstances have not shifted. You may notice space opening inside you where tension once lived. This is not coincidence. This is the quiet work of healing, moving steadily through your inner world, preparing you for the year ahead. Stillness becomes the atmosphere where this transformation takes root. Not the stillness of inactivity, but the stillness of alignment. A deep internal settling that allows your heart to rest without fear of collapse. After months of carrying weight that stretched your limits, something within you finally recognizes that restoration cannot be rushed. It must be welcomed. It must be allowed. The stillness that rises now is not emptiness. It is a sign that you are finally giving your soul the space it needs to breathe and rebuild. As your inner world reorganizes itself, clarity begins to emerge in subtle ways. Thoughts that once felt tangled start to unravel. Memories that once brought heaviness begin to release their grip. Emotions that were difficult to process find their voice, not through overwhelm, but through honesty. You begin to understand that healing is not the absence of past pain. It is the ability to look at the pain with new eyes, free from the weight it once carried. In this clarity, you discover truths that were hidden beneath exhaustion. You realize that much of what broke you this year did not break you because you were weak. It broke you because you cared deeply. You loved fully. You tried sincerely. You held on longer than anyone knew. You gave what you had even when your heart felt stretched thin. And now, as the layers of exhaustion fall away, you begin to see the strength embedded in every fragile moment. You survived more than you admit. You held yourself together in ways no one else witnessed, and now the strength you built is becoming the foundation of your healing. There is something sacred about recognizing your own resilience. It creates a shift within you. You stop seeing yourself as someone who barely made it through the year. You begin to see yourself as someone being prepared for a new one. Someone who endured without losing their capacity to hope. Someone who walked through heaviness without losing their ability to rise. This shift is subtle but powerful. It is the moment when restoration begins to feel possible, not just conceptually, but deeply, personally, undeniably. As the silence continues its work, the heart becomes more receptive to divine presence, not in dramatic encounters, but in gentle impressions. A sense of peace that comes without explanation. A sudden relief that washes over you when you least expect it. A warmth in places that felt numb for months. A whisper of reassurance in moments when you felt most uncertain. Restoration often begins with these quiet assurances, small yet strong enough to steady your spirit. The reconstruction happening inside you is not fragile. It is intentional. It is precise. It is guided by a love that knows exactly what needs to be rebuilt, what needs to be released, and what needs to be redefined. You are not becoming who you were before the breaking. You are becoming someone new, someone more grounded, someone more aware of their own worth, someone who no longer carries the year's heaviness as identity, but as testimony. This chapter marks the threshold between internal preparation and visible transformation. You may not fully understand what is shifting within you, but you can feel it. And that feeling is enough. It is the evidence that your heart is no longer bracing for impact but opening to possibility. Before 2026 begins, the restoration inside you is becoming steady, rooted, and real. And soon the changes that started quietly within will begin shaping the way you step into the new year. There is a stage in every restoration where God does more than heal what hurt you. He begins to show you who you are beneath the wounds. Not the version shaped by disappointment or fear, but the version that existed before the year pressed heavily against your spirit. Identity often becomes distorted in seasons of hardship. The battles you fought in 2025 may have convinced you that you were weaker than you truly are. The moments where you broke may have made you question your worth. The silence you carried may have made you feel unseen or forgotten. But restoration always reveals a truth that pain tries to bury. You were never defined by what happened to you. As your heart begins to settle and your inner world reorganizes itself, you start to recognize pieces of your identity that were overshadowed by exhaustion. You remember the courage that carried you through storms you never expected to face. You remember the passion that once moved you toward dreams you placed aside. You remember the softness in your spirit that survived, even when life hardened your circumstances. These memories are not nostalgia. They are reminders of the person you did not lose, even though the year made you feel distant from yourself. Identity is often shaped quietly. You do not notice the shift when you're in the middle of a challenging season. You adapt, you adjust, you armor yourself. You do what you must to make it through the day. In this process, pieces of who you are become muted. You speak less boldly. You dream less confidently. You hope more cautiously. You settle more quickly. Not because you stopped believing, but because believing required energy you did not have. Now, as restoration moves deeper, God begins lifting the layers that covered your true self. You may feel moments of unexpected clarity, like a sudden knowing that you are capable of more than the year allowed you to see. You may feel strength rising in areas where you once felt small. You may feel a new sense of direction, even if the path is not yet visible. This is identity returning. Not a return to your past, but a return to the core of who you were always meant to be. The version of you that pain dimmed is becoming visible again, and this time it returns with wisdom. God restores identity by revealing truths you forgot, that you are resilient even when you feel fragile, that you are valuable even when you feel overlooked, that you are growing even when life feels still, that you are worthy of goodness, even after a year filled with struggle. These truths rise from within you as quietly as the first signs of morning. They do not shout, they unfold. They remind you that your identity is not built on success or stability. It is built on a foundation that cannot be shaken by disappointment. As you embrace this emerging version of yourself, something powerful happens. You stop interpreting your future through the lens of your past pain. You stop expecting your next season to resemble the one you barely survived. You begin to imagine possibilities again, not with naive optimism, but with grounded hope. You start to feel drawn toward what aligns with your truth and distant from what contradicts it. Identity redirects the soul. Identity clarifies what you will allow and what you will no longer carry. Identity becomes the internal compass guiding you toward 2026. This chapter marks a turning point in your restoration, the shift from healing what broke to reclaiming who you are. It is the moment when you realize that the year did not diminish you. It revealed you. It stripped away layers of exhaustion, expectation, and fear. And now, standing at the threshold of a new year, you are not who you were in January. You are stronger. You are clearer. You are more aware of your own worth. And as this identity rises within you, the next chapter of your life begins to take shape. As you move closer to the end of the year, a quiet realization begins to form within you. There are things you carried through 2025 that cannot follow you into 2026. Not because they were meaningless, but because they have completed their purpose. There are fears that once protected you, but now limit your growth. There are relationships that once felt essential, but no longer align with who you are becoming. There are memories that once defined your pain but no longer hold authority over your identity. Letting go is not a rejection of what was. It is an affirmation of what is rising within you now. Letting go does not always feel liberating at first. Sometimes it feels like standing between two worlds, one that is familiar but heavy and another that is new but uncertain. You may find yourself lingering in the doorway, afraid to move forward because the past still feels unfinished. Yet the truth is simple. Not everything is meant to be carried into the next chapter of your life. Some things were only meant to accompany you for a season, to teach you resilience, to build your character, to awaken your strength. Their purpose was real, but their time has ended. There is a deep emotional intelligence in knowing what no longer belongs to you. The exhaustion you felt this year, the confusion that clouded your decisions, the inner battles you fought quietly, all of these experiences shaped your heart, but they do not define your future. Your spirit now understands that holding on to what weighs you down will only restrict the restoration unfolding within you. You are not leaving pieces of yourself behind. You are leaving the versions of yourself that were shaped by survival, the parts that were necessary for a while, but no longer represent the truth of who you are. Letting go is not an act of abandonment. It is an act of alignment. When you release what no longer serves your growth, you make room for what is meant to arrive. This release may feel subtle at first. A shift in your emotional energy, a change in what you tolerate, a new boundary forming quietly inside you. You start to see things more clearly. You begin to recognize what drains you and what restores you. You stop chasing what does not reciprocate. You stop forcing what does not fit. You stop apologizing for needing peace. There is also a sacred sadness in this process, a gentle grief that comes from acknowledging that not everything can move with you into the next year. You may mourn relationships that faded, dreams that changed shape, or expectations that were never met. This grief does not mean you are failing. It means your heart is honest. Honesty creates the space for renewal. You cannot be restored while clinging to what was only meant to teach you. The soul knows when a chapter is complete, even when the mind resists. As you let go, you begin to feel lighter in places that once felt tight. You sense clarity in thoughts that were once tangled. You recognize freedom in emotions that once felt restricted. This is the sign that your spirit is making room for 2026. Not the superficial idea of a new year, but the deeper truth that your internal landscape is shifting. You are clearing the ground for new possibilities, new connections, new direction, new life. Letting go is not losing. It is preparing. This chapter marks the phase of your restoration where release becomes renewal. The burdens that accompanied you through 2025 no longer have a place in the story you are stepping into. The emotional loops that held you captive are loosening. The heaviness that shadowed your days is lifting. And as you allow these things to fall away, you become aligned with a version of yourself that is ready to rise. The closing of this year is not an ending. It is a transition. And what you release now will create the space for what God is preparing to restore. There comes a moment in every restoration journey when you begin to sense that something new is emerging within you. It does not arrive with noise or dramatic declarations. It comes quietly, like a soft rising inside your spirit. After months of carrying weight and walking through emotional shadows, you begin to feel a gentle strength returning. Not the kind of strength that forces you to endure, but the kind that allows you to move with clarity and presence. It is a strength born from healing, not from survival. This emerging version of yourself is different from who you were at the beginning of the year. You have walked through silence, exhaustion, brokenness, and release. These experiences reshaped your understanding of what matters, of what aligns with your spirit, of what deserves your energy. Now, as the old layers fall away, your soul steps forward with a depth that only comes from journeys that tested your heart. The part of you that once felt fragmented is gathering itself with purpose. The part that felt uncertain is finding direction. The part that felt dimmed is slowly remembering its own light. Restoration is often recognized not by what changes outside of you, but by who you become inside. You start responding differently to situations that once drained you. You start choosing peace more intentionally. You establish boundaries without guilt. You allow yourself to rest without feeling unworthy. You speak with more honesty. You listen to your needs with more compassion. These shifts may seem small, but they are evidence of profound transformation. They show that you are no longer acting from the fear that shaped your past, but from the truth that is shaping your future. This renewed self carries a softness that is not weakness. It is the softness of someone who has walked through enough storms to understand the value of gentleness. It is the softness of someone who knows their worth without needing to prove it. It is the softness of someone who no longer feels threatened by uncertainty, because they trust that restoration is unfolding even when the path is not fully clear. This softness is strength refined by experience. It becomes the lens through which you see the world, the anchor that keeps you grounded, the voice that guides your next steps. You may notice that your heart feels more open than it has in a long time. Open to possibilities, open to connection, open to healing, open to joy. This openness does not come from ignoring the pain of the year. It comes from surviving it. It comes from learning that brokenness does not disqualify you from goodness. It comes from recognizing that you are capable of rising even when you feared you might remain in pieces. Your emerging self is not a return to who you were before the breaking. It is the unveiling of who you are becoming because of it. As this new version of you rises, the world around you may not immediately reflect the transformation within. External circumstances may look familiar, but your perception of them has shifted. You navigate challenges with a steadier spirit. You recognize opportunities that once felt invisible. You give yourself permission to grow beyond what once defined you. This internal shift creates a ripple effect. What once triggered anxiety now meets resilience. What once drained you now meets discernment. What once felt impossible now feels reachable. This chapter marks the moment when restoration becomes identity. The healed version of you is no longer a future hope. It is becoming your present reality. You are stepping into 2026 not as someone who barely survived the year, but as someone who allowed their heart to be rebuilt in the places where it once broke. This emergence is not the end of your journey. It is the sign that you are ready for what comes next. For alignment. For peace. For new beginnings shaped not by fear, but by truth. There is a moment near the end of every journey where the heart becomes still enough to recognize the truth it has been moving toward. You are not crossing into a new year as someone broken, fragmented, or uncertain of your worth. You are crossing as someone who has been quietly restored from within. Everything you faced, everything you carried, everything you released has prepared you for this turning of seasons. You are not stepping into 2026 empty. You are stepping in renewed. The year did not end the way you imagined, but it is ending with something more valuable than easy conclusions. It is ending with clarity. It is ending with strength. It is ending with awareness of who you are beneath the layers of pain you once mistook for identity. What felt like breaking was the opening for restoration. What felt like loss was the clearing for change. What felt like silence was the space where God rebuilt what exhaustion had worn thin. And now, at the threshold of a new beginning, you stand with a heart more capable of receiving than it has been in a long time. As it says in Psalm 147:3, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Let these words hold you as you step forward. They are not distant promises. They are the truth of what has been unfolding inside you piece by piece. God did not wait for the new year to begin healing your heart. He started in the quiet moments when you felt least aware of His presence. He worked in the layers you tried to hide. He strengthened you in the places where you once felt fragile. His restoration is not sudden. It is steady. It is purposeful. It is already in motion. And now, before the new year begins, let this message settle deeply into your spirit. You are not defined by the weight you carried. You are not shaped by the moments that broke you. You are not entering 2026 as someone diminished by the past. You are entering as someone who has been rebuilt in truth. What tried to silence your hope has lost its voice. What tried to steal your joy no longer holds you. What tried to weaken your spirit has become the ground where your strength now stands. Your heart is not fragile. It is awakening. It is remembering. It is rising. This new year does not come to repeat the wounds of the last one. It comes to reveal who you are after everything you survived. Walk into 2026 with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they are guided. Walk with the peace of someone who no longer carries what was never theirs. Walk with the strength of someone who allowed restoration to begin before the year even turned. You are healed in ways you are only beginning to understand. You are whole in ways you once believed were impossible. And the story ahead of you is brighter than the year behind you, because the restoration already started within you, and it will not stop now.